On Friday, September the 10th, 2021, a court of appeal in Abuja ruled that the parties of the value-added tax collection dispute should maintain status quo, and which is a layman's term, and in the legal parlance means that parties involved in collection dispute should go back to the situation where they were before the suit was instituted. What this means is that the states should still collect and remit VAT to the federal government until the matter is determined. Let's take your minds back a little. You'll recall that the Federal High Court in Port Harcourt held that it was unconstitutional for the FIRS to collect VAT and personal income tax in Rivers State. Following the court order, governors of Rivers and Lagos State Governor Nyesom Wike and Babajide Sanwo-Olu signed into law bills authorizing the state government to collect VAT. A move being resisted by the FIRS, forcing it to approach the Court of Appeal to stay execution of the decision. The value-added tax is a tax levied on the price of a product or service at each stage of production, distribution, or sales to the end consumer. Let's understand what this means. Of course, I introduced him earlier as the partner and tax leader for West Africa Deloitte, Mr. Yomi Olugbenro. Mr. Olugbenro, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Tolu. Good to be on your show.
Thank you so much. It's been a while. Let's look at all of these issues and where we stand at the moment. You're a professional when it comes to this. Now, how does this come to you? Why are the states doing this even at this time?
Well, Tolu, it's not surprising that we're here. I think it's part of the whole agitation for fiscal federalism, for resource control. For states to get a lot more from the revenue that is derivable from their state. So this has been on. So perhaps the political conversation was dragging, and states, saw opportunity to approach the judges, the courts, to help determine this. And for me, I think for once, we should at least applaud a process where we want to adopt due process. We want to go through the courts. We know it will go. I mean, it would typically raise all sort of confusion and challenges at the outset, which is what we are having at the moment. But that's the situation. It's all agitation for a more fairer and equitable way of distributing our national revenue.
Now, I looked at this and saw that in 2020, V.A.T displaced PPT and even CIT, standing at 1.53 trillion naira. Now, many have also argued that really, if this happens the other way, can the states even manage this collection?
Well, that's a very important question that you ask. So, because I think overall, why this, the position where we are may be good from a fiscal federalism perspective. We are a federating nation, we're a federation, and therefore you expect each tiers of government to be able to exercise, their constitutional power. And if you look at what the current gap in the constitution in terms of what's currently listed on the exclusive legislative list, there seems to be, an alignment with what the original judgment says. Now, but what is good from a fiscal federalism perspective may not necessarily be good to businesses, may not necessarily be good to taxpayers, may also not necessarily be good in the short term at the minimum for many of the states. Because there's a completely different ballgame when you have to set up the structure and ensure that the revenue authorities within your state have the capability and the capacity, and that the level of efficiency can be raised to a point where you will, at the minimum, generate what you currently have from a centrally collected and administered system. And I have my fears and I have my doubts that in as much as it's a completely different conversation, like many people will want us to say, but it's also a very critical conversation for us to have, that, look, across the states, which states can boast of the capacity and the capability to be able to raise from and collect from its taxpayers the amount that is currently shared from the center. That's going to be tough. It didn't take FIRS just 1, 2, 3 years to get to where we are, and we know that even that system itself, the fact that it's still central, still has its own challenges. So creating a new system altogether, in each of the states, it's not going to be an easy one. And more importantly, it's not going to be very easy for businesses and taxpayers. The challenges of dealing with 37 different state tax authorities when it comes to tax matter will create a lot of fiscal crisis, in the country. It's going to complicate the ease of paying taxes and the ease of doing business. We're going to have a lot of interstate trade disputes. You're going to have instances where your trucks, leave one state and is heading to another state for the purpose of delivering goods, and it's going to be at the border, of the state for hours or for days, because that state tax authority want to be sure that the VAT is collected. So it's going to be a lot difficult. And there are also issues around what does the deductibility of input VAT, what prospect does it have in a situation where you have incurred input VAT in state A and you are selling in state B? Will state B allow you to make deduction for taxes you pay to another state before remitting to it? So there's a whole lot of conversation. Maybe perhaps when all of this settles a bit, if the resolution is in favor of states to administer the V.A.T, maybe we need to start asking whether it's V.A.T we really need in Nigeria, or a form of sales and goods tax, because that will eliminate some of the complications, particularly those relating to input VAT deductibility and the rest. But the short answer to your question is that I have serious fears. I have a lot of doubt, judging by what is currently on the ground, with the capacity of the state to be able to help themselves to a level where they can even get what they currently get from the center.
Some will also talk about the sharing formula, where we have 15% for the federal government, 50 to states, and 35 to local governments. As a tax professional and expert, do you think there should be any review around this?
Well, it will always be an important conversation to determine whether the sharing formula is equitable and fair. There are at least 2 layers of allocation formula or sharing formula. So there is the first one that you did mention, which is the one that determine what percentage goes to the federal, what percentage goes to the state, and what percentage goes to the local government. So you have rightly articulated is 15, 50, and 35 respectively. Now, that conversation itself, if we stay with that first sharing formula, even the federal government, in a number of conversations we've had to query whether 15% is equitable, whether 50% is right for the state. We know that in addition to the 36 states of the federation, a significant element of the V.A.T is collected by agency of the federal government. The Nigerian Customs Services, for example, and the FCT, also collect a significant part of the V.A.T. In fact, I think the number you mentioned of about 1.53 trillion that we collected last year, more than half of that, maybe nearly 60%, will go to both the Nigerian Customs and the FCT. So, if the federal government collects, say, 60% or thereabout, it can as well raise question as to whether 15% is equitable. So, but that's even one leg of the question. I think the sharing formula that has been subject of a lot of conversation is the basis of apportioning the 50% that then goes to the state. So when state get half of the total V.A.T that is available, there is the allocation formula for what amount goes to state 1 and what amount goes to state 2. So currently, 20% of the total that is available to state is shared based on derivation, right? 50% is shared based on equality, meaning that all states get equal amount from that 50%, and then 30% is based on population. So there's been a lot of agitation that this doesn't appear to be fair. If derivation principle is only limited to 20% what is collectible, and 80% of what is available to state is shared based on parameters that doesn't actually have any link with the business activity within that state, there's a lot of agitation, right? So and that's part of the issue. So maybe depending on where all of this legal talks will end, at the minimum I will expect that for the sake of fairness and equity, and togetherness also, because it's also very critical. It may be important for us to take a second look at the allocation, the sharing formula, particularly how each of the states share from what is centrally available to state, and how each local government shares from what is totally allocated to the local governments.
Now, I would also ask again, staying with the states, that is this sustainable? Is this a sustainable project now with the view of financial projections and debt profile of most states? It might even affect salary payments.
In the short run, I think some states are going to be hardly hit if we go by the current trajectory where we allow each of the states. Maybe in the long run, with the effectiveness and efficiency of revenue agencies in each of the states raised, and then the reality hitting differently, and obviously each of the states will have the capacity to moderate how the law is operated within its own state, what amount of input VAT is deductible, what's going to be the rate of VAT. We are beginning to see differential. River State essentially just adopted what currently exists at the central by charging 7.5. Lagos State says it's going to be 6%, and it's going to be some bit of competitive battle from state to state, wanting to look a lot more attractive. But from the statistics as we have it, from the reality of how the VAT collection, how it adds up, my fear is that there is virtually no state in the short run that's not going to be a little bit pained by the process, because it's not just going to be the same thing. So you are still going to set up the structure, you are still going to set up the framework, you still need to design the mechanism for ensuring audit and review, and making sure that taxpayers comply appropriately. So it's going to take some time. My fear is that in the short term, it's not going to be easy one for any state, not even state like Lagos, not even state like River State, let alone some other state that, if you look at what they are doing currently with personal income taxes and other levies collectible within their state, you wonder whether they're ever going to get to the point within the next 3 years to be able to administer VAT effectively. And it's not surprising that a number of states are beginning to align with either the protagonist or the antagonist, depending on how they evaluate their own operational efficiency.
Mr. Olugbenro, let me also ask that what is the plan? What do we have for MSMEs, small businesses? We already had a review that put those with a business below 25 million naira not going to be a paid tax and all of that. Will all of this affect all that is on ground?
I'm afraid yes, it will. If you judge by what the version of the law that has been passed in Lagos State and has been passed by River State, because if you recall, the original VAT as we had it up until the last 2 years didn't actually have any threshold for registration, doesn't really have any exemption for MSMEs. Now, the exemption for MSMEs came via the Finance Act that was enacted in 2020. And when River State and Lagos State, at least the version of the VAT law that we have seen them make, when they were crafting their own bill, what they essentially did was to pick up a copy of the central VAT, the same federal VAT, and essentially just customize it to fit into states, substituting FIRS for their respective Internal Revenue Services Board. And because that specific provision was not contained in the original VAT law that they are adopting, the change was covered in a separate legislation, the Finance Act. So states have passed law that didn't make any provision for MSME. So technically speaking, unless anything is done, the law as we have it in Rivers and in Lagos State doesn't have exemption for any micro business. So that's going to bring back the pains of having small businesses go through the rigor and the stress of tax compliance with respect to VAT. Is going to complicate, and it's going to worsen Nigerians' ranking on the ease of paying taxes and the ease of doing businesses, because that's part of the relief that gave us some bit of mileage, in those rankings. So it's going to be a lot of nightmare for businesses. It's potentially also going to increase costs for businesses, because if businesses in a particular state are not able to get full deduction for the input VAT they incur in other states, it's just literally going to add to the cost of doing business. It's going to add to the cost of sales. So at the end of the day, there's a potential that we need to be mindful of inflation, of rising price level, and the attendant implication on Nigerians and taxpayers. So it's something that we need to actually weigh very carefully. It's good. for us to be excited by the fact that we are aligning to fiscal federalism. But my view is that it's good for fiscal federalism, but it's bad for business, it's bad for taxpayer, and it's potentially disadvantageous to state in the short term at the minimum.
Very well and brilliantly said. Mr. Olugbenro, let me also bring up this argument where some have said, well, we've talked about it, it's online, it's everywhere, and people keep on sending these comments that sharing from states where you get money from alcohol and spirits and all of that, and it's prohibited in some territories and all of this. Some say this is just exaggerated. I don't know, maybe you agree, because they said such products account for like just 3% of VAT revenue. But all of these arguments, does it hold waters in any way?
Well, there's some element of truth on both sides. We know that there are a number of states in the country that practices some tenets that that are morally restrictive in terms of what you could consume, and all of that. But I think we shouldn't just go by the headline. I think sometimes the fact and the devil is in the details. So what we need to ask ourselves is, question number one, I think it's hasty generalization to assume that the totality of a region, doesn't probably consume alcohol. I don't consume alcohol, but I know that there are many states and there are many hotels within the north where if you go there, they probably consume as much alcohol as they do in the West, irrespective of the Sharia practices that prohibit, alcohol in some states. So it's hasty generalization, and we need to look at the number, right? So are we saying in states like Kaduna, in states like Kano, in some other states, there are no Christians there, or there are no Muslims or people of other faith that actually do consume these beverages? And it's not just alcohol, there's alcohol, there are other beverages that are all merged together. So maybe part of our challenge is the fact that we do not have enough statistics, to be able to analyze some of this information. But if you go to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics information, you will know that, number one, these numbers may not be as significant as we think they would. All right, and if indeed it should, states that are talking about socially restrictive practices in some part of the country should also recognize that when they implement V.A.T in their own state, it's not necessarily going to be the exact, quantum of contribution they have in the past, that they're going to be entitled to collect. Because when each state starts its own V.A.T law, it means the consumption in each state will be liable to VAT in that particular state. Currently, and you will have had this argument a number of times, that because of the way businesses are, centrally structured, and what we have termed headquarter effects now. So in a state like Lagos, in a state like Rivers, or in some other state, if you have a business that has its headquarter in your state, irrespective of the spread of the business of that entity across the country, that business accounts for its VAT centrally from a single state. So aggregating all of the businesses across the country and remit to FIRS from that particular state. So a state like Lagos, for example, is probably going to be the major culprit or beneficiaries of this. So many of the FMCGs, many of the banks, many of telcos that have their headquarters in Nigeria remit their V.A.T in Lagos State. It doesn't mean that the entirety of that consumption happens in Lagos State, even if we assume that Lagos is still a significant contributor. So when you begin to analyze and make sure that businesses do segregated accounting and make sure that they could remit V.A.T in the state where the consumption is done, each of the states will see their reality. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of economic lobbying, that will, come after that. So you will have state governors probably talking to their citizens who have had businesses established in different parts of the country to say, look, you need to move your administrative headquarters, or you need to move your head office to a particular state in the interest of their state and all of that. So this conversation, is much broader. The federal government, for example, could come up with rules and say, look, certain types of businesses needs to have their headquarters located in Abuja, and that changes the dynamic all over, altogether. So there's no end to all of this conversation, and so that's why, for me, this issue can only be resolved from a multi-front approach. It can't just be a legal issue. There's a political consideration, there's a legal issue, there is an economic side to this conversation, and we all need to sit at the table. At the minimum, as a tax consultant, and judging by the way we have been pushing for making paying taxes and doing business in Nigeria a lot easy. And judging by what is happening all around the world, a number of countries that currently have a federal structure that have their states, administering V.A.T. Some of them are probably having conversation to have it centralized. If you a country like Brazil, so many of them are tilting towards centralization. India used to have a similar structure, and they knew the kind of mess they were in when interstate businesses was a lot of nightmare. They have to they have to revert back to a central system. So within that context, for me, I think we should tilt more towards making sure that the complaint around the sharing formula not being equitable, not being fair, let's deal with that so that in the interest of business, we do not overcomplicate the existing complications we have with ease of doing business and ease of paying taxes. We cannot afford to have taxpayers having to deal with 36 different state tax authority because they want to comply with V.A.T. We cannot afford to have small businesses now thrown back into the pot because states now have their tax law. It's not good for business. It's not good for taxpayers. And in the short run, states need to be mindful of the fact that it's going to be a long walk for them to be able to get to a system where it really can be profitable for them. So we need to have, sit at the table. My understanding is that there's going to be an expedited hearing of, the substantive stay of execution appeal, maybe sometime this week. I'm hoping that we can have this resolved. The 21st day of September is the next due date for filing of V.A.T. returns. Taxpayers don't know where to go. I've had lawyers, speaking from both sides. Some say status quos mean, states can continue to collect. Some say status quo mean neither state nor federal. And so taxpayers are confused. So we need to be able to have this issue resolved expeditiously. Before the 21st day of September, we need to have some bit of clarity where, at least from a legal perspective, we know where we stand, and then the conversation can conclude from the back end for a more equitable political solution.
All right, well, beautiful submission there. I've been speaking to partner tax leader for West Africa, Deloitte, Mr. Yomi Olugbenro. Thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us and making us understand this better. Thank you so very much. We appreciate this.